The world has its eyes fixed on Ukraine, tanks rolling across the plains, missiles striking cities, and NATO pouring weapons into the battlefield. But while Europe trembles, another storm is gathering far from Kyiv, far from Moscow. This one is in Africa. On the northern edge of the continent, Morocco has been buying American and French weapons at a breathtaking pace: F-16 fighter jets, HIMARS rocket launchers, Javelin missiles. Across the border, Algeria has turned eastward, shaking hands with Moscow and placing an order for Russia's most advanced stealth fighter, the Su-57. Two neighbors divided by history and by the sands of Western Sahara are now arming themselves to the teeth. Some call it a defensive measure. Others fear it is the opening chapter of a new proxy war. And yet, as Morocco leans on Washington and Algeria leans on Moscow, there is another voice rising in the heart of Africa. In Ouagadougou, Captain Ibrahim Traoré has chosen a different path, rejecting both NATO's promises and Russia's temptations. While his northern neighbors build their futures around foreign jets and missiles, Traoré speaks of sovereignty, of a security model rooted in the people, not in imported weapons. To many Africans, he represents a third-way one that neither bows to the West nor clings to Moscow. So here's the question we must ask. Will Africa's future be defined by endless arms races and foreign powers pulling the strings, or will it follow leaders like Ibrahim Traoré who dare to imagine independence beyond the barrel of a gun? Please share if you feel that you are one of the first to know about and support President Ibrahim Traoré, and subscribe if you believe that the truth is more important than the headlines. When we look at the map of North Africa, it seems calm at first glance. But beneath the surface, Morocco and Algeria are preparing for what could become one of the most dangerous military buildups on the continent. The seeds of this rivalry were planted decades ago: wars over borders, disputes over Western Sahara, accusations of subversion. By 2021, relations had collapsed completely. Embassies were shut, diplomatic ties severed. From that moment on, both nations began preparing not for dialogue, but for deterrence. In Rabat, Morocco's leaders turned westward. They leaned on their old allies in Washington and Paris, and those allies responded with open arms. Throughout 2024, Morocco signed deal after deal that stunned military analysts. In July, Rabat ordered 200 Army tactical missile systems known as ATACMS, capable of striking deep into enemy territory. Alongside them came US-made HIMARS launchers, the very same rocket systems that have become famous in Ukraine. A few months later, Morocco placed an order for 90 F-16 Block 70 fighter jets, the most advanced version of America's trusted workhorse in the skies. On top of that, 600 Javelin anti-tank missiles were added to the list, shoulder-fired weapons that NATO forces use to halt Russian armor. And here is the remarkable part: the United States has promised to deliver these weapons to Morocco before even its closest Asian allies like Taiwan and South Korea. That is how deep Washington's trust in Rabat now runs. For Morocco, this is more than defense. It is a strategic embrace by NATO itself. But while Morocco was stacking American weapons, Algeria chose a different road. Long tied to Moscow since the Cold War, Algeria has always relied on Russian jets, MiG-29s, Su-24s, Su-30s, and the Yak-130. It was no surprise then that when tensions with Morocco escalated, Algiers turned to Russia once again. The moment came in November 2024 during China's Zhuhai Air Show. Behind closed doors, Russia's arms exporter confirmed that a nation had placed an order for 14 Su-57 stealth fighter jets, Moscow's crown jewel, the only fifth-generation aircraft in its arsenal. Russia would not say the buyer's name, but Algerian media made it clear the deal was theirs. If confirmed, Algeria will become the first nation in Africa and the first in the Arab world to operate stealth fighters. For the balance of power in North Africa, it is nothing short of revolutionary. Morocco's F-16s, even the newest Block 70, cannot match the Su-57 in radar, stealth missile range, or maneuverability. NATO's southern flank, Spain and Italy, would suddenly face an Algerian air force with capabilities once reserved only for Russia, China, and the United States. This is the new reality: Morocco betting on Washington, Algeria betting on Moscow. Each side convinced that more weapons will guarantee security. But history has shown again and again that such buildups often lead not to safety, but to war. And this is where Ibrahim Traoré enters the picture, not as a player in the Morocco-Algeria rivalry, but as a reminder that Africa can choose a different model. In Ouagadougou, Traoré has rejected both NATO's promises and Russia's temptations. Instead of chasing the most expensive jets, he has invested in local defense industries, civilian militias, and the principle of sovereignty. Where Morocco and Algeria build their strength around foreign contracts, Traoré builds his around people and independence. The question then becomes sharper. Is Africa's future tied to endless arms races dictated by Washington and Moscow, or can leaders like Traoré carve out a sovereign path where security comes not from imported missiles, but from unity, dignity, and self-reliance? This is the drama unfolding right now. Morocco and Algeria are modernizing their militaries with breathtaking speed. Russia and NATO are quietly taking their places behind them. And in the middle stands the wider African continent watching, wondering which path it should follow. The turning point came in November 2024. At the Zhuhai Air Show in China, Russia's arms exporter announced that a secret customer had placed an order for 14 Su-57 stealth fighters, the most advanced warplanes in Moscow's arsenal. The statement was vague, almost cryptic. But within hours, Algerian media erupted with pride. The buyer was them. For Algeria, it was more than just a purchase, it was a declaration. For Morocco, it was a shock, and for NATO, it was a nightmare. Why? Because the Su-57 is not just another fighter jet. It is Russia's answer to America's F-22 and F-35. Sleek, angular, almost invisible to radar, capable of striking targets far beyond the reach of Morocco's incoming F-16s. It can carry more fuel, more weapons, and engage at distances nearly twice as long as its Western counterparts. Suddenly, Algeria had leapt a full generation ahead in air power, not just against Morocco, but against Spain, Italy, and every NATO airbase in the Mediterranean. The symbolism was powerful. Morocco had tied its fate to Washington and Paris, buying the same systems deployed in Ukraine. Algeria had tied its future to Moscow, importing the jet that Vladimir Putin himself showcased as Russia's technological pride. Two African neighbors, once bound by geography, now became extensions of global fault lines, NATO on one side, Russia on the other. The reactions were immediate. In Washington, defense officials quietly acknowledged that Algeria's move would complicate NATO's southern defense strategy. Spanish analysts warned that Eurofighter Typhoon's Madrid's frontline jets would now face an adversary they were never designed to counter. In Paris, murmurs grew about how France, once the dominant power in North Africa, was losing ground to Moscow's influence. And in Moscow itself, state media celebrated Algeria's purchase as proof that Russia could still sell cutting-edge weapons despite Western sanctions. But perhaps the most revealing response came not from Europe or Russia, but from ordinary Africans. Across the continent, voices rose with a mix of pride and fear. Pride that an African nation could finally wield weapons once reserved only for superpowers. Fear that this arms race between Algeria and Morocco might turn the Maghreb into another Ukraine, this time on African soil. This is where Ibrahim Traoré's voice resonates most sharply. While Morocco and Algeria escalate, Traoré has chosen to de-escalate. In speeches across Burkina Faso, he warns that imported weapons do not guarantee sovereignty, they often deepen dependence. He points to the Sahel, where French and American interventions left instability rather than security. His strategy is not about buying fifth-generation jets, but about building fifth-generation citizens-trained militias, national service programs, and self-reliant industries. To his supporters, Traoré represents a new Africa, one that refuses to be a pawn in the great chessboard of Washington versus Moscow. To his critics, he is naive, ignoring the reality that raw military power still decides borders. Yet the contrast is undeniable. While Algeria unveils Su-57s and Morocco celebrates F-16s, Traoré reminds Africans that true power is not measured in missiles, but in sovereignty. The high point of this drama is clear. Algeria has crossed a threshold, becoming the first in Africa and the Arab world to field stealth fighters. Morocco's edge, once guaranteed by American support, is suddenly in question. NATO watches nervously. Russia smiles triumphantly. And Africa itself faces the most dangerous question of all. Will this race end in deterrence or in devastation? History teaches us that when two rivals both arm themselves to the teeth, sooner or later the weapons are used. In 1963, Morocco and Algeria fought the Sand War. In 1975, they clashed again over Western Sahara. What will happen now when the skies above them are filled not with outdated jets, but with stealth fighters and precision missiles? That is the tension hanging over North Africa today, a tension the world cannot ignore. In Morocco's streets, the new contracts for F-16s and HIMARS are announced with fanfare on state television. But for the average Moroccan family, the news brings little comfort. Prices of bread, fuel, and medicine continue to rise, while billions of dollars are committed to weapons that may never be used, or worse, may one day be turned against their neighbors. Parents whisper fears that their sons will be drafted if the rivalry escalates. Mothers ask quietly, why do we need more jets when our schools don't even have roofs? Across the border in Algeria, the story is eerily similar. The announcement of Su-57 sent a wave of pride through the press, but also a wave of unease through the population. Algeria's economy, heavily dependent on oil and gas, has been battered by global shocks. Young people demand jobs, not warplanes. Yet their leaders speak of sovereignty through firepower, insisting that only military superiority can secure the nation's place in a hostile world. Beneath the surface, frustration simmers. Ordinary citizens wonder whether they are witnessing the birth of national strength or the beginning of national sacrifice. Politically, the arms race has hardened positions on both sides. In Rabat, Morocco's leaders justify their military buildup by pointing to Western Sahara, framing the Sahrawi independence movement as an Algerian-backed threat to national unity. In Algiers, officials counter by accusing Morocco of being a pawn of NATO, an outpost for Washington and Paris. Both governments invoke nationalism to rally support, but in doing so, they risk cornering themselves into a cycle of escalation from which it may be impossible to retreat. For the wider Maghreb, the danger is profound. The region has long struggled with unemployment, migration pressures, and fragile political institutions. An arms race diverts scarce resources away from schools, hospitals, and infrastructure, funneling them instead into hangars and missile silos. The result is a deeper sense of alienation among the youth, millions of young men and women who already feel abandoned by their governments. History shows that such alienation often becomes the fuel for unrest, extremism, or mass exodus toward Europe. And Europe is watching closely. In Madrid and Rome, defense planners calculate how Su-57s based in Algeria could threaten NATO's southern flank. In Brussels, diplomats warn that instability in the Maghreb could trigger new waves of migration across the Mediterranean. What begins as an arms race between two North African nations could quickly spill over into political crises across the entire European Union. It is here that Ibrahim Traoré's model offers a striking contrast. In Burkina Faso, resources are not poured into billion-dollar stealth jets, but into housing programs, local industry, and citizen militias trained to defend their own communities. Traoré argues that sovereignty cannot be bought from Washington or Moscow. It must be built from the ground up with the people themselves as the foundation. For elders and families across Africa, his message resonates deeply. It suggests that true security lies not in escalation, but in dignity and self-reliance. But in Morocco and Algeria, that message is drowned out by the roar of engines and the promises of foreign suppliers. The civil consequences are already visible: strained budgets, growing inequality, and a generation of youth forced to watch their futures traded for weapons they may never touch. The political consequences are even darker: leaders locked in rivalry, unable to step back without appearing weak, unwilling to compromise for fear of losing face. The tragedy is not yet inevitable, but unless the cycle is broken, ordinary citizens, the very people both governments claim to protect, will bear the heaviest cost. From Washington's perspective, Morocco has become one of its most reliable gateways into Africa. The deals for F-16s, HIMARS, and Javelins are not just arms sales. They are a signal that NATO's influence stretches firmly across the Strait of Gibraltar. Morocco's willingness to buy weapons ahead of Taiwan and South Korea has been interpreted in Washington as proof of loyalty. Yet behind closed doors, American strategists worry. They know Algeria's purchase of Su-57s could tilt the skies in Russia's favor, turning North Africa into yet another theater where Moscow challenges NATO. For a White House already consumed by Ukraine, Gaza, and tensions in the Pacific, the prospect of a third front is deeply unsettling. In Moscow, the reaction was celebratory. State media presented Algeria's Su-57 order as a triumph over Western sanctions, proof that Russia could still export its most advanced technologies, despite global pressure. For Vladimir Putin, the symbolism was clear. If NATO could use Ukraine as a proxy in Europe, Russia could use Algeria as a strategic partner in Africa. The Su-57 deal was not only about money, it was about influence, prestige, and planting the Russian flag in the Mediterranean skies. Meanwhile, Europe finds itself trapped between anxiety and responsibility. Spain and Italy, NATO's southern front lines, see Algeria's new stealth jets as a direct threat. Analysts warn that Eurofighter Typhoons would struggle in any confrontation with Su-57s. For the European Union, which already faces migration crises, economic stagnation, and political fragmentation, the last thing it needs is instability in the Maghreb. Yet paradoxically, European powers like Spain and France continue to back Morocco's claims over Western Sahara, inflaming Algeria's anger and deepening the divide. The broader world views this arms race with unease. African nations from Ghana to South Africa debate whether Morocco and Algeria are strengthening sovereignty or simply handing over their futures to foreign suppliers. To many observers, this feels like history repeating itself, two African states becoming pawns in the struggle between global powers. For the global South, the Maghreb arms race is a warning of how quickly great power competition can suffocate local priorities. And in this global conversation, the figure of Ibrahim Traoré stands out. In speeches across the Sahel, he warns that Africa must avoid becoming a chessboard for others to play upon. His policies in Burkina Faso, rejecting Western aid with strings attached, building local defense forces, investing in social infrastructure, are being noticed beyond Africa. Even in Latin America and Asia, analysts cite Traoré as a symbol of a new sovereign model, one that resists the gravitational pull of both Washington and Moscow. For the United States, this presents a paradox. On one hand, Washington sees Morocco as a loyal partner. On the other, it cannot ignore the growing influence of leaders like Traoré, who reject NATO's framework altogether. For Russia, the story is the same. Algeria may be a strategic buyer, but the Sahel alliance led by Traoré demonstrates that not all African nations are willing to lean on Moscow either. Thus, the global picture is complex. Morocco and Algeria are pulling themselves deeper into the orbit of NATO and Russia. But in the heart of Africa, Traoré represents a third voice, one that says true sovereignty is not imported, it is created at home. And perhaps that is the question the world must confront. Will Africa be the next stage of superpower confrontation, or will it be the birthplace of a new model of independence? North Africa is standing on a razor's edge. Morocco fills its runways with American F-16s and HIMARS launchers. Algeria answers with Russian Su-57s, stealth fighters designed to dominate the skies. Each nation claims to be securing its sovereignty. Yet in truth, they may be walking into the very trap they seek to avoid, becoming extensions of foreign power struggles armed not for peace, but for proxy conflict. History whispers its warning: the Sand War of 1963, the clashes over Western Sahara in 1975, decades of distrust, border skirmishes, and broken ties. Today, the weapons are far deadlier, the stakes far higher. When both sides commit to escalation, the room for diplomacy shrinks. And when NATO and Russia quietly line up behind their chosen partners, the risk is no longer just a regional standoff. It is the specter of another Ukraine, this time across the sands of Africa. For ordinary citizens in Morocco and Algeria, the price is already visible: billions spent on foreign jets, while families struggle to afford food and medicine. For Europe, the fear is that instability will spill across the Mediterranean in waves of migration. For Washington and Moscow, the Maghreb has become yet another chessboard, another place to test influence at the expense of local lives. But Africa is not without alternatives. In Ouagadougou, President Ibrahim Traoré speaks a different language, one of sovereignty without dependency, of strength rooted in people rather than weapons. His message is a reminder that Africa's future does not have to mirror the past. It can resist the temptation of imported security models and build its own path. Whether the world listens is another matter. So we are left with questions that demand reflection. Will Morocco and Algeria's rivalry spiral into a new war, dragging NATO and Russia deeper into African soil? Or will leaders across the continent choose a third way, the path of sovereignty and independence, championed by voices like Traoré? The answer is not yet written. But one truth is clear: if Africa does not claim its own destiny, others will write it for them. And now I turn to you. Do you believe that President Ibrahim Traoré's vision offers Africa a real alternative to this dangerous arms race? Can Africa chart a future of sovereignty without becoming a battlefield for world powers? Please share this video if you believe the world must pay attention to Africa before it is too late. And subscribe if you believe that truth, hard, uncomfortable, unfiltered truth, matters more than headlines. Together, let us keep this conversation alive because silence is the greatest weapon of all.